Good morning. Today is Monday, August 7th, 2023. A central feature of sitting Shiva, observing the period of mourning after the death of an immediate family relative, is the Shiva minyan, the prayer service that takes place in the home of the mourner. Preferably the home, Shiva is being observed in the home of the deceased, but wherever the family is gathering, to have a minyan in that place. Now, having a Shiva minyan is not a requirement of mourning. And there are at least two reasons that it is so prevalent. The first is purely utilitarian. The mourners want to be able to say Kaddish, which requires a minyan, 10 adult Jewish males plus other men and women, and the mourners are not supposed to leave the house during Shiva. So the minyan comes to them. Of course, if for whatever reason the minyan does not come to the mourners, it is perfectly permitted and it is the right thing for the mourners then to go to the synagogue to say Kaddish. On the level of Kabbalah, of Jewish mysticism, there is an idea that the neshama, the soul of the one that passed away, in some sense has a connection or a presence to the Shiva home where Shiva is being observed, and therefore having a prayer service there brings nachas ruach, brings a spiritual fulfillment or gratification to that soul, to the neshama of the person that passed away. And that means that there's a benefit to having a Shiva minyan, even in a situation where there is no one who is saying Kaddish. The minyan at a Shiva house has several subtle changes from a regular minyan that takes place in shul, mostly at Shachris in the morning service, but some of them at Mincha and Mariv as well, the afternoon and evening service. And these are very easy to miss because they are slight omissions. But it's important to review them because they are so profound and so sensitive. So let's look at just a few of them. At least some of the alterations that take place within the Ashkenaz service, looking at Shachris, the morning service. Shiva is a time for sadness and grief. And we want the mourner to encounter that sadness and grief, not to try to avoid it or ignore it. So we alter the prayer service slightly to reflect that. One of the greatest pleasures for a Jew, which a mourner sitting Shiva is denied, is learning Torah. It is permitted for the mourner to study Torah that is relevant to sitting Shiva, and it is permitted to study Torah within the context of eulogizing or paying tribute to the deceased. But any other study of Torah is denied, that pleasure is denied to the mourner. There are a couple of sections of our prayers in the morning that are not prayers per se, but actually learning Torah. For example, near the beginning of Shachris, the morning service, is a section of prayers called karbanos, the sacrifices, the offerings, which is not a prayer at all. It is rather a review, a Torah study session of the offerings and sacrifices that were offered every day in the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. That's part of our service. But since it's learning Torah, not prayer, we omit that section. And omitting that should propel us to focus on the depth of joy that learning Torah at other times does or should bring us. For a similar reason, in Shachris, the morning service, during Chazaras Hashatz, the reader's repetition of the Amidah, we omit the paragraph of Birchas Kohanim, the priestly blessing. Normally, we recount the blessing that the Kohanim, the priests, would daily bestow on the Jewish people in the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple in Jerusalem when the temple stood. And there's a specific detail of that blessing. It had to be given with love and with joy. But those emotions are inappropriate in a house of mourning, and therefore we omit that paragraph. On the other hand, we don't want the mourner to sink into despair or emotional distress, so we omit the prayer tachanun. This is a prayer that we say Shachris in the morning and Mincha in the afternoon after the Amidah, the standing prayer, the Shmona Esrei. This prayer is also called Nefilas Apayim, falling on our face. In other words, we say it when we are sitting and we bend over and we put our head in our hand. And it's a prayer of humility, of submission, of utter reliance on God. And the prayer contains the 6th Psalm in Tehillim, Psalm number 6, which includes these lines. Hashem al ba'apcha tochicheni. God, do not rebuke me in your anger. Rafa'eni Hashem ki nivhalu atzamai. Heal me, God, because my bones are in agony. V'nafshi nivhala ma'od, and my soul is in anguish. Ki ein b'mavis zichrecha. Bishol miyodalach. Because no one remembers God when they are dead. Who can praise God from the grave? Yagati ban chasi. I am weary with my sighing. Escha b'chol laila mitasi bedimasi arsi amsa. Every night I drench my bed in tears. Now, that prayer is a necessary corrective to the arrogance so many of us regularly carry. But for a mourner who is already suffering, that is just too much. And so we omit it. Normally, the one leading the davening, leading the prayer service, the shliach tzibur or the chazan, says Kaddish after the Amidah. We've discussed before recently the different forms of the Kaddish prayer, and one form of that prayer, the one that is said after the Amidah, morning, afternoon, evening, contains this line, Tiskabel tzloson uvoson techol beis Yisrael, kadam avahun divishmaya. We say to God, we just finished offering this prayer, the Amidah, the standing prayer, we say to God, Tiskabel tzloson uvoson, accept God our prayer. Receive our prayer. Heed our prayer. That we add that line to the Kaddish. Now, some people have the custom that this line is said in a Shiva minyan as normal, no alteration. Same as always. Some have the practice that that line is always omitted in a Shiva house. There's this third position, which is our practice, and that is if the mourner himself is leading the prayer, he omits it. But if someone else is leading the prayer, then it is said by that other person. Now, this is very subtle. Very hard to notice that one line that is normally said is omitted. But the message is exquisitely profound and sensitive. Because a mourner may feel that God has not listened to their prayers. If in a situation where they were praying for the recovery of their loved one, the healing of their loved one, and still that person died and now they're mourning, the mourner may feel that God is closed off from their prayers. God forbid. We've discussed this many times. And we discussed this specific idea in connection with Tisha B'Av. We discussed it a couple of weeks ago. Now, it's not true, which we have stated many times, but it would be understandable for a mourner to feel that. And if that mourner were to say this line, to say to God, Tiskabel tzloson uvason, God, accept my prayers, the mourner may feel bad. Because the mourner may recall that he feels that God is not being makabel. God is not accepting their prayers. And so it is omitted in sensitivity to the feelings of the mourner. Alternatively, there could be a situation of such tragedy and trauma, God forbid, that a person in their suffering and despair might come to utter a prayer to be harmed. God forbid. So there could be a situation where we would not want God to heed a certain prayer of someone in such despair, and so we request, when it is offered by the mourner, Tiskabel, the request, Tiskabel, accept my prayers, we omit that, just in case there is something that, due to the grief, is inappropriate to be expressed. In both cases, by this omission, we are validating an emotional feeling which, even if incorrect, is understandable under the circumstances. One last omission for today. Near the end of Shachris, the morning service, we say a prayer that starts with the words Uva L'Tzion, and it begins with a quote from the prophet Isaiah, Yeshayahu Hanavi, 2 verses from the prophet Isaiah. And we quote the first verse, Uva L'Tzion Goel, but we omit the second verse. Now, the second verse of that quote that we normally say every day, but we omit in a Shiva house, is as follows. Va'ani zos brisio samamar Hashem. God says, this is my covenant that is with them. Ruchi asher alecha dvarai asher samti beficha. My spirit that is on you, my words that I have placed in your mouth, lo yamush mipicha, umipi zaracha, umipi zera zaracha, amar Hashem me'atav yad olam. That my spirit and my words that I have placed in your mouth will not depart from you, and not from your children, not from your grandchildren, for all time. I will stay with you, I am with you, I am inside you. It's a beautiful sentiment, it's a beautiful line. But we omit it in a Shiva house. Why? What's wrong with that? First of all, it seems like a lovely, wonderful sentiment. And secondly, it has no connection to mourning, neither to joy nor to sadness. Why omit it? So the answer may sound far-fetched, but allow me to share what I believe is the wisdom of it. Our sages were afraid that a mourner might hear those words, read those words, hear those words, and misread them, mishear them, misunderstand that quote, and think mistakenly that when the verse says, as brisi, when God says, my covenant will remain with you for generations, the mourner might mistakenly think that what is being said in the term, my covenant, somehow means that the mourner in their present state, the way they are now in mourning, should remain with them for generations and generations. God forbid that they should remain in their state of mourning. Of course, that's not what it means. But we're afraid that the mourner might misunderstand, mishear, and think it to be something that is wishing evil to a person and not good. God forbid. Now, this is also a mistake that many people make at a Shiva house, even people with extensive Jewish education. There is no obligation during Shiva for a mourner to sit. A mourner can sit, a mourner can stand, a mourner can lie down. The only rule is that if a mourner is sitting, they should sit on a low chair. That's part of an act of mourning, to sit on a low seat. When we leave a Shiva house, we offer a standard farewell, and we use the words, and our sages provide us with these words because so often we don't know what to say, what the right thing is. So our sages are giving us the words to say. Hamakom yinachem oscha b'soch shara velei Tzion Yerushalayim. God should comfort you among the other mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. I see many times a guest will say to a mourner who happens to be standing, please sit down so that I can say, Hamakom yinachem eschem. I can say this line to you while you are sitting. So that's a mistake. Again, and I've seen very, very knowledgeable Jews do this. It's a mistake for two reasons. Number one, there is no reason for a mourner to sit when saying that line. There's no connection between that line and sitting. But number two, the Talmud specifically says not to say that. And that is a law, a rule that is codified in Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Jewish Law. You should not say to a mourner, sit down. Because, again, this kind of far-fetched idea, but this is mentioned in the Talmud and codified in Shulchan Aruch. A person hearing those words, the mourner hearing those words, might make the mistake, and clearly it's a mistake, of thinking that what the person is saying is sit down and stay with your mourning. Sit down and remain in the condition that you are. God forbid. That's not what we're saying. We don't mean that. We don't say that. But a person might misunderstand it. So we are not supposed to say to a mourner, sit down. Clearly not what the words say. In the example of the quote from Yeshayahu, from the prophet Isaiah, it's clearly not what the words say, but it reminds us of a very important lesson. When a person is in emotional extremis, that person might be hypersensitive. They might take words they hear, words we say that are perfectly appropriate, and still be offended by them or hurt by them, even when that was clearly not our intention. So we must be super attentive in what we say to a mourner, everything we say to a mourner, and consider not only what we say, but how it might be heard by a mourner who is grieving. In these alterations, subtle as they are and as easy to miss as they are, we have all the themes of Shiva. Confronting the loss, but in a structured, supportive environment. A way to help try to prevent despair, and also to prepare the seeds of gradual consolation and supersensitivity to the feelings of a mourner, even if those feelings are based on erroneous thinking or a misunderstanding, to still validate and be sensitive to every word we say. My friends, I wish you a great day, and I look forward to seeing you in person very soon.